Family. Welcome to the Practical Purpose Podcast. It's your boy, Dr. Brian Williams. I'm back. Listen, if you're anywhere close to South Carolina, you snowed in right now, so you don't have nothing else to do. So you might as well jump on and see what we're talking about. Um, we're gonna talk about a tough topic today. We're gonna talk about a tough one. We're talking about unforgiveness. And maybe forgiveness is something. I'm checking to make sure my sound working. All right, we good. Listen, maybe forgiveness is something that you struggle with. It's something that I struggle with. Maybe it's something that you've been holding on to for so long, maybe years. Maybe something happened in your childhood. Maybe something has happened with someone that you've been partnered with, right? Maybe it's something on your job that has caused you some pain and some strife. And we're here to talk about today what unforgiveness does in our lives, right? We're here to talk about whether or not forgiveness is freeing or whether or not it's empowering or whether or not it's something that keeps you shackled down, right? Whether or not it's smart to forgive, whether or not it's wise to forgive. Listen, we struggle a lot with holding on to things that we may have should have let go a long time ago, right? Maybe that's you. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's somebody you know. Maybe you need to listen to this. Maybe there's something here that could free you. It may not be the whole 45 minutes to an hour. Maybe it might be one moment that can free you and help you become the person that you should be, that you've been trying to be. Maybe you're locked in. Maybe you're just stagnant because you're holding on to unforgiveness. It's a hard topic, but we're going to talk about it today in the dungeon. Practical Purpose Podcast. Lock in, invite a friend. Let's go.
How excellent are you? How excellent are you on your level? Like you spend so much time talking about other people at your job. How excellent are you on your level? Are people benefiting from your excellence?
Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. We living life with a practical purpose, making every day worth it. Live from the dungeon, we go deeper than the surface, leading with wisdom from the streets to the churches. Searching, what seeking you find? We speaking right to your mind. The sun ain't fighting to shine, or diamonds either. Light hit the Jews and turn fools to believers. Steady making moves and teaching truth to the leaders. Use all these tools just so you can supersede us as real. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Yeah.
Unforgiveness is one of those things where it's like, oh, it's just me and I'm just holding on to this thing. But a lot of people just don't realize that bitterness and unforgiveness always spills out in your relationships and your ability to love and be loved, and how you treat and view people. When you hold on to unforgiveness, it has a huge impact on your relationship with God, and it destroys you more than like anything else, and it's the silent killer, right? And I heard one person say unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Unforgiveness really hurts you. They might not even know you haven't forgiven them, but you are impacted greatly.
Forgiveness is probably one of those things that goes untalked about and we don't like to bring into the light in our life that holds us back from it. And what I encourage people is if God's stirring them up, like get help, man. It takes a lot of work to forgive people who have really harmed you. But the best thing that we can do is work that out. Unforgiveness.
Listen. Shout out to my boy. This is my media guy, Tim Griffin. Yes, sir. We in the game now. Best friend on here, Barry. Shout out. Wilmot. Listen, unforgiveness. He said something powerful in that clip. He said, unforgiveness is like holding on and drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That was powerful when I saw that. Like we hold on to things that we probably should not hold on to, and we're thinking that we're doing a benefit to the other person by holding on because I have the right to not forgive. And I'm thinking I'm hurting the other person by not forgiving them, when in actuality, you're silently destroying yourself. Forgiveness is critical in our lives, especially as we get to the spiritual side of this thing a little later. It's critical in the life of a believer because God actually gives us some power to forgive. And he also gives us the negative side of not forgiving. And he's very blunt about not forgiving. Listen, forgiveness is not an occasional act, Martin Luther King says. It is a constant attitude. Listen, we don't forgive once and then forgive twice. We constantly forgive when people do us wrong. We constantly forgive. And if you're going to be who you're supposed to be, if you're going to be that person that you're called to be in this life, maybe it's as a father, a mother, a husband, or a wife, maybe it's as a leader on your job, right? If you're going to be that person that you're called to be, then you have to have a constant state of forgiveness, a constant attitude of being willing to forgive. My friend Wilmot Berry says it this way: you have to be more selfless and less selfish. Listen, if you're going to be that person, you have to understand that I have to walk with a constant attitude of forgiveness. And what we'll discuss a little later is you have the power to do that. God has given you the ability to forgive no matter what it is. And it's because you have been forgiven. Listen, let's define forgiveness. This is a tough definition here. Forgiveness, the act of ceasing to feel resentment against an offender. Let me read that again because that's a tough definition. The act of ceasing to feel resentment against an offender. Listen, sometimes we think just saying or forgiving means that I do this one time and it's over with, but you have to forgive every single time the thought of unforgiveness comes up. You have to forgive every single time that thought comes up. It's the act of ceasing to feel resentment. And that's so hard because sometimes we think we fully forgiven a person, but we still feel resentment. I struggle with that. I struggle with not feeling resentment for certain people when the issues keep coming up in our relationship or in our life. Right. And so the act of ceasing to feel resentment, we're called to be people who are forgiving people. Listen, and not forgiving imprisons you. Listen to this. When you forgive, you set a prisoner free and you realize that the prisoner was you. Let me say that again. When you forgive, you set a prisoner free and you realize the entire time the prisoner was you. It's critical. It's important that if we want to be free, if we want to walk in freedom, then we have to be people who understand the power of forgiveness. Because after all, if we call ourselves children of God, then we have been forgiven of a debt that we couldn't pay ourselves. Right. And so when you forgive, you set that prisoner free and you realize that you were the prisoner. Holding on to resentment and unforgiveness and holding on to wanting to get back at people, vengeance, it imprisons you and it slowly decays you from the inside. It takes a strong person to constantly live in an attitude of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not for the weak. It takes a strong person to do that. Gandhi says this: the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. And the dichotomy in that statement is the fact that when we forgive, oftentimes we feel like we gave in. We feel like we was just being the bigger person. When in actuality, it takes a strong person to forgive. Even more so, it takes a strong person to reconcile when reconciliation is necessary. Listen, Wilmot Berry says this: Jesus is the definition of forgiveness. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to get to that. Listen, you have to be in a constant state of wanting to forgive, and it's primarily because you understand that you have been forgiven. My boy, Sue, he says, "What if you forgive, but there are things that bring up the situation that you thought was for?" I'm assuming you're saying you thought you forgave. Does that truly mean forgiveness was never in place in order to be free? That is an amazing question, and I think that as I go through this, I'll answer that. But I think that forgiveness is a process. Right, I think it's threefold. I think we forgive on the surface level, right, or twofold. We forgive on the surface level, but it begins as a heart thing, and we don't always see that heart change immediately, right? And so I think as things begin to unfold, you realize maybe I didn't fully forgive this person, or there's something else in that situation that I have to forgive. And we're going to work through that, because I don't think you automatically forgive one time and it's over with. I think it's a constant thing that you have to do. And as situations get deeper and you learn more information, then you have to continue to forgive. That's my boy, man. That's my frat brother, but that's my friend too. Listen, so let's talk about some practical ways first that we forgive, and that we walk in forgiveness, and that we address unforgiveness in our lives. Let's talk about some practical ways. Here's the first thing: is you have to acknowledge the hurt honestly. You can't hide from the hurt that you felt. You can't hide from the hurt that's been done to you. You can't hide from the fact that someone that you may have trusted or loved did something to you that harmed you. You can't hide from it. And one of the first things that we talk about always here on the Practical Purpose podcast is that we can never address what we don't acknowledge. And so you have to acknowledge the fact that someone did something, or some situation happened that caused you to feel unforgiveness in your heart. Listen, you name it, you don't minimize it, right? You don't exaggerate it, but you remove the power of unforgiveness by acknowledging. And I think that's the first thing that we have to do. And like my boy Takir said, as situations unfold, we always realize that there may be some more unforgiveness that's needed. Doesn't mean that I didn't forgive. I forgave what I thought I knew about the situation. But now I have to continue to walk in that perpetual state of forgiveness as I learn more, right? As I learn more about that person or that situation. So you acknowledge the hurt. You be honest about it. Someone hurt you. You have to be honest about it before you can even get to a state of forgiveness. Be honest about it. Right. And maybe you're on the other side of that. Maybe you're the one that caused the hurt. And oftentimes we don't empower people to forgive us because we don't acknowledge that we did something that we need to be forgiving for. Let me say that again, if I can. Sometimes we don't empower people to forgive us because we are afraid to acknowledge that we even need to be forgiven. We think we're always right. My perspective is the only perspective. My way is the only way. And whatever I did, you just took it the wrong way. Right? You did something to someone and you think that their response to it was based off of how they saw it. But it's based off of how you presented it. And sometimes in order to empower people to forgive, we have to acknowledge that we need to be forgiven. Right? And we'll get down to that a little more in the spiritual side, but we have to acknowledge that we need to be forgiven. Here's the second thing, or another thing that goes along with addressing unforgiveness. You feel it, but you don't act on it. What do I mean by that? Sometimes when we have an ought against someone else, or we feel like someone has done us wrong, the first thing that we want to do is retaliate. The first thing that we want to do is go get vengeance. We want to try to inflict our own definition of what justice is on that person. And that's all natural. That's all normal. But Forgiveness is a choice, it's a decision that we make in our hearts before we do it openly, right? And so you feel those feelings, but you don't act on those feelings of vengeance, right? You work through whatever that means. You work through, how can I forgive this person? Not because they deserve to be forgiven, right? But because we have to operate in a state of forgiving so that we free ourselves. So you acknowledge the hurt honestly. You feel, but you don't act. Here's the third thing is you separate, this is a good one. You separate forgiveness from trust and reconciliation. Listen, just because I forgive you don't mean I trust you. Like you may have damaged that ability to be trusted again, right? Just because I forgive you don't mean I'm reconciling anything in this relationship. And I'm not talking about just a marital relationship or anything like that, but trust goes into every relationship. Reconciliation works in every relationship. Maybe it's your siblings, maybe it's your parents, right? Maybe it's your children, maybe it's your coworkers. But listen, you have to separate forgiveness from trust and reconciliation. And you have to be prayerful enough, you have to be wise enough to know, when is it time to reconcile? When is it time to trust again? Or when is it proper for me to put up barriers? Right? Forgiveness does not mean you have to reconcile or trust. You build up boundaries and you release resentment. You build up boundaries and you release resentment. It's so critical. It's so powerful in our lives that we recognize that, because so often we don't separate our heart when we think about forgiveness, right? And so we're so quick to trust again until we're putting ourselves back in a negative position. We're putting ourselves back into a bad situation because we don't understand that this situation, the best thing is for me to forgive and to move. And then in another situation, the best thing may be for me to forgive and to reconcile. Listen, PK and Tan says, and that doesn't mean I have to allow you access to me. Right, right. And we'll get to that too. Emotional safety. And that's called having emotional intelligence, situational intelligence, right? When you know where to properly place people in your life so that they don't cause damage to you. But in that same sense, we have to recognize that anyone that we love has the same proclivity and propensity to cause damage. And the only reason they can cause damage is because we love them. Someone you don't love causes a lot less damage to your heart than someone that you do love. So we acknowledge the hurt honestly. We feel, but we don't act on that vengeance, right? We don't act on that vengeance. I'm trying not to go to the spiritual side, but we don't act on that vengeance. We always want to talk about justice. We always want to talk about being fair, right? But I saw a quote the other day that said, if life was fair, if it was all about justice, then all of us should have been the one hanging on the cross. Listen, we separate forgiveness from trust and reconciliation. Listen, Miss Edmonds says forgiveness can be so hard sometimes and can cause so much emotional damage. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I believe in so many cases, Ms. Edmonds, it is a process, right? And some days we're up, some days we're down, some days we're working on ourselves, and some days we don't work on ourselves. And I think the more we understand, because we live in this microwavable society that we think that everything gets fixed one time and the first time and very quickly, the more we understand that this may take years for me to work through, and we're committed to that work, we understand the power of that work, then we can cut it off piece by piece and we can accomplish it. But it doesn't happen overnight for everybody. And then there are cases where it does happen overnight, right? But we have to be willing to do the work. And I think so much in our circles, especially in America, we're not willing to do the work on ourselves. We're so willing to blame someone else for our emotional state, right? And we don't want to do the work, but we choose to stay where we are because we're not working on ourselves as much and with the veracity that we should and could. And it's hard to do. Listen, the first thing I said was forgiveness is hard. It is hard. It is difficult because of the reason that you need to forgive. Something negative has happened that causes you to need forgiveness. Listen, number 4 is you count up the cost of holding on. Sometimes it's more detrimental to you to hold on to unforgiveness than it is to just forgive. Listen, unforgiveness can affect your peace and how you deal with others. If you remember the clip that I played at the beginning, he said something critical, and he said, unforgiveness plays a role in how we relate to people. And so now, because this person did something to me, when I get into the next relationship that's like that, and when I say relationship again, I'm not just talking about marital relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend. When I get in the next relationship, right? I'm gonna always, if I'm walking in that unforgiveness, see this person like I saw the last person, right? And unforgiveness can affect us because it affects our peace and how we deal with others. Letting go is more about you than it is them. I can't walk in the relational intelligence that I need to walk in if I'm holding on to unforgiveness in my heart. I'm going to always treat people the way that I felt like I was done wrong if I'm holding on to that unforgiveness. Listen, without forgiveness, life is governed by an endless cycle of resentment and retaliation. Let me say that again. Without forgiveness, life is governed by an endless cycle of resentment and retaliation. And that is a hard place to live. It's a hard place to always feel resentment. It's a hard place to always feel like I have to get vengeance. I've got to get this person back. Then I've got to get that person back. That's a hard place to live. But it's also hard to forgive. So you choose which hard you want. Forgiveness is hard. A life of unforgiveness is hard. But you choose which one you want. And it takes some work on ourselves to forgive someone else. Number 5, listen, choose forgiveness as a process. Forgiveness does not always happen suddenly. You decide to take small steps, releasing bitterness little by little while allowing space to heal. It's a process. And you know what I'm discovering in my life is that much of the things we want in our lives is a part of a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not the Big Bang theory. It's not just one thing that happens and everything begins to happen. Oftentimes, it's steps and stages that God uses in our lives, and it's to build a character within us so that we can understand how to operate the way He wants us to operate once we've mastered the task. Listen, it's steps and stages. My friend Wilmot says that all the time. Like this is going to happen in steps and stages. And it's the same way with forgiveness. Once you make a conscious choice to choose to forgive, then you have to also make a conscious choice to take steps towards forgiveness. Listen, the worst resentment that anybody can have is one they feel justified to keep. Ooh, that's good. The worst resentment that anybody can have is the one they feel justified to keep. and you feel like because this person did me wrong, I'm justified in not forgiving them, right? It's perfect. I don't have to forgive them, right? And we're going to discuss that a little later too. But I'm justified because what they did was so bad to me that I'm choosing not to forgive them, and that's okay, right? But what we'll discuss later is that because we've been forgiven, then we have an obligation to forgive. Listen, you choose forgiveness as a process. I used to tell my basketball players this, told my son this just the other day. You know, the worst thing to live with is regret. You don't want to get down to your deathbed and regret that you didn't forgive a person. The worst thing to live with is regret. And because it creates a cycle in your life of resentment and retaliation. And it's a hard place to live. That's a hard place to live when you're constantly looking to get back at folk who did you wrong. So it's a hard place to live. Listen, if you look at a lot of movies, right? In most cases, the villain is determined to get back at somebody. They became the villain because they live in a perpetual state of wanting to repay someone for some wrong that was done to them. And what do? They end up not just hurting the person or attempting to hurt the person that did wrong to them. They end up hurting a lot of people because they chose as the villain to live in a perpetual state of resentment. Maybe you are your own villain. Maybe you are self-destructing your life by choosing to not forgive. Maybe you are your your Joker in Batman. Maybe you are your own villain. Like maybe you're not where you're supposed to be, not because of what they did to you, but because of what you continue to garner and what you continue to hold on to, and you're choosing not to forgive. Maybe you're your own villain. And that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Maybe I'm my own enemy because I'm choosing to hold on to something that I should have made a decision to release a long time ago, right? Not saying that it's easy to release it, but I got to start with making the decision that I'm going to do what it takes to release this. And I posted something on Facebook, I think yesterday, and I said you cannot negotiate with what's destroying you. And if unforgiveness is destroying you, you got to stop negotiating with it. And you have to decide that, hey, I am going to forgive and I'm going to walk in forgiveness because if I don't, I'm going to destroy myself. Mm. Maybe you're your own villain. Maybe you are your own worst enemy. Listen, number 6 is this: you reframe it, but you don't excuse it. You may have to reframe what was done to you, but you don't excuse it. Wrong is wrong, right is right. But you may need to reframe it in order to begin that process of forgiving. Seek understanding rather than justification. Seek understand. And this is so hard to do because when we try to seek understanding when someone has done us wrong, we feel like we're justifying what they did. We feel like we're excusing what they did, right? But oftentimes you have to dig a little deeper to understand, why did this person do this? Maybe it's something else going on that will allow me to understand it. Now, I don't think it was right, but I understand why they may have done it, and I don't excuse it. Listen, there's a story. We're not on the spiritual side, but there's a story in the Bible that I was just reading one day last week where a woman was brought to Jesus in the act of adultery, right? And it's interesting that the woman was brought to him, but it takes two people, right? And the woman was brought to him, and a part of the law, see, they were trying to trap Jesus. The law said, Mosaic law said that they must stone this lady. And the scripture says that Jesus said, well, whichever one of y'all have never sinned, y'all started us off. Throw the first stone. And they didn't throw any stones. And he bent down and he started writing. And we don't know what he began to write, but whatever he wrote began to convict those people. And they started walking away. And Jesus asked the lady a question. He said, where are your accusers? And she said, they're not here. And he said, well, neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more. Listen, he did not excuse what she did, but he empowered her by saying, I'm not accusing you. You go and do it. Don't do it again. Essentially, he was saying, don't do that again. Right. And it's important for us to understand that sometimes we have to seek understanding rather than trying to get back at people. And that forgiveness oftentimes is the fuel, watch this, that person needs to change their life. Sometimes it's not just about us. Sometimes that forgiveness is the fuel. And that's why I said this months ago. I posted it on Facebook or somewhere, and I said that sometimes we have to forgive folk so that it empowers them to change their life. Maybe your unforgiveness is not only destroying you, but maybe it's holding someone else back from becoming who they're supposed to be. Maybe God is trying to use forgiveness in you to change someone else. And sometimes we get so caught up in the box of what was done to me that we forget that our response to what was done to me may be the fuel and the power that someone needs to change their life for the better. And one day they may come back and say, I changed my life because you chose to make a decision that you didn't want to make. Maybe that's why. Listen, if you like coffee, get you some of that mushroom coffee. I love that mushroom coffee. Listen, so sometimes forgiving is not just about us. It's empowering to someone else. I mean, think about how you feel when you know you did something wrong to someone else and they come to you and say, "You know what? I forgive you of that." If you're a genuinely good person, if you genuinely have a heart for people, then that's going to empower you to love that person even more because they didn't have to forgive you. Listen, and number 7 on the practical side is that if you want to address unforgiveness, you've got to set some healthy boundaries. I could park right here because this is what we don't do. You have to set healthy boundaries. Forgiveness works best with clear boundaries. You got to set healthy boundaries. Like there's some people that don't deserve access to you all the time. And we live in a society where it's so easy to get in contact with people, right? You can call them on their cell phone. You can call them on their house phone. Some people still got house phones. You can hit them on IG or Facebook or all these other social media platforms. You have so many ways to access people. And we don't cut these access points off so much so that people feel like they can get to us anytime. And if you're going to walk in forgiveness, you've got to set some healthy boundaries. There's some things that I'm not saying anymore, I'm not doing anymore, I'm not talking to you about anymore because I've got to set some boundaries. And we struggle to do that, and it's because we've become such a global and social society that we've always feel like we have to have access. Listen, we wake up in the morning and we go to our phones and we get on Facebook and we get on Instagram and we get on social media so that we can see what's going on around us. We've become a society that doesn't know how to set boundaries. And it speaks to our relational capacity. We don't know how to set boundaries. And so if you're going to walk in forgiveness, you got to set some clear boundaries for people, and you've got to have some relational intelligence. You got to know, hey, this person goes here. This person goes here, and this person goes here. It doesn't mean I'm cutting people off. You may have to, but you've got to know where to put people in your life if you're going to walk in forgiveness. So 7 things that we talked about the practical ways to address unforgiveness. You got to acknowledge it, right? You have to feel it, but don't act in vengeance, right? That's difficult to do, especially in the moment, right? You separate forgiveness from trust and reconciliation. You count up the costs of holding on. Sometimes it's more expensive to hold on to that thing than it is to get rid of it. And sometimes on the front end, it costs you a lot to forgive, to decide to forgive. But in the back end, it's so much more important that you do that. Number 5, you choose forgiveness as a process. That's so powerful to me. You choose forgiveness as a process. This is something that I've got to work on every day. This is something that I've got to take some positive steps towards. Listen, you reframe it, you don't excuse it, and you set some healthy boundaries. Those are practical ways in our life that we address unforgiveness. And I'm gonna say this quote again: forgiveness is hard. A life of unforgiveness is hard. You have to choose which hard you want. And it was a man that said that to me in the gym. I was lifting weights, and I was like, man, this hard. I was doing a different workout, and he said, hey, being in shape is hard. Being out of shape is hard. You choose which one you want. Either way, it's gonna be hard. And so you have to choose to walk in forgiveness. That's the practical side of it. So here on the Practical Purpose podcast, we always try to hit the spiritual side of things. And the reason why we try to hit the spiritual side of things too is because I believe personally that a lot of times when you're trying to change things in your life, and I know my target audience are people who go to church every Sunday and they hear that they can just pray their way through things. But there are some practical steps you got to take in your life if you want to improve your life. But the substratum, the foundation of what we do physically and emotionally comes from our spiritual well-being. And so I always like to look at forgiveness or whatever the topic is, not just from a practical side, but from a spiritual side. So let's look at the spiritual side very quickly and we'll get out of here. But forgiveness spiritually is even more powerful. So when you think about this thing from a spiritual side, you have been forgiven, so you forgive. Right? Listen to what Colossians 3 and 13 says. 3:12 and 13 says, it says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with these things. Listen to what these 5 things are. He says, compassion, kindness, humility. That's that selflessness, right? Gentleness and patience. And listen to what he says in verse 13. This is Paul. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. That's critical. Because the power to forgive was in the B clause. He said, you forgive because God has forgiven you. And so on the spiritual side, we have the power to walk in forgiveness, but it's only when we understand that we are forgiving others because we've been forgiven. And when you think about what you've been forgiven of, we'll get there in a second, then it becomes a little bit more pressing on us to forgive someone else. Listen, there's 3 points in that text that I want to bring out. The first one is this: forgiveness reflects God's grace. Forgiveness reflects God's grace. Listen to what Ephesians says here. Ephesians 4:32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. So forgiveness reflects what God did in our life. When we forgive, we mirror how God has forgiven us. Listen to this: freely and undeserved. So sometimes we are waiting to forgive people until they deserve it. And if we wait on that, we'll never forgive them. But the way we mirror what God has done to us is God forgave us freely. He didn't ask for anything in return, and He gave us when we did not deserve it. And if you're honest with yourself, if you look in the mirror, if you look down the annals of your life, that since you were born, you have been forgiven of stuff that you didn't deserve to be forgiven of. And so, who are you to withhold that feeling from someone else? Listen to this. You have sinned against God infinitely more than someone has sinned against you. I saw a quote somewhere that said, when you walk in unforgiveness, you are effectively saying that what they did to you is worse than what you did to God. When you walk in unforgiveness, you are effectively saying that what that person did to you is worse than what you did to God. Listen, you've sinned against God infinitely more than someone has done something negative to you. And so he chose to forgive you when you did not deserve it. And that, Paul says, is the power that rests in us to forgive someone else. I'm not forgiving just because God said forgive. That's a good reason to do it. But God never tells us to do something that he doesn't empower us to do. He empowered that woman that was caught in adultery by saying, I don't condemn you. Now you go and don't do it again. The I don't condemn you is the part that empowered her to go and not do it again. Now, we don't know if she never did it again. We don't know that. But we know that Jesus gave her the power to do it. And when you withhold forgiveness from another person, you are withholding the power that they may need to go live a successful life. So now it's not just decay inside of you. Now it's not just hurting you. Now you're possibly hurting someone else, deterring them from the life that they're supposed to be living because you refuse to forgive. Listen, we forgive not only for us, but watch this, but to draw others to God. See, because forgiveness reflects God's grace, then forgiveness also innately shows other people the character of God. So maybe you're not displaying the character of God. Hence, you're not allowing someone else to come into the knowledge of who God is. And it's all because you're choosing to walk in unforgiveness. And this is bitter now. No, this is bitter because we feel like it's we're justified in not forgiving people. And it's tough because sometimes we're in that state. How dare I forgive them for doing that? No, I'm not. They don't deserve that. You didn't either. But we walk in that forgiveness because we've been forgiven. And I know I'm on the spiritual side, but just look at this in more practical way. When you've done something to someone else and they come to you and say, you know what, I forgive you, it empowers you. It empowers you. It is the fuel you need to now go and live a better way. Now, you can use that fuel to do the negative thing again, or you can use that fuel to say, you know what, I'm going to become the person I'm meant to. Because I know I'm running long, y'all, but I don't mind today. Y'all snowed in like me. So the first thing Colossians 3:13 teaches us is that forgiveness reflects God's grace. Here's the second thing: forgiveness frees the heart. Letting go of bitterness releases emotional and spiritual weight, and it makes room for God's peace. Let me share a thought with you that may um, prick you a little bit. I said months ago that God's response to our proper way of praying is always peace. When you pray, you may not get the answer you want, but God always, over time, gives you peace, right? Maybe you're not receiving that peace from the things you're praying for because you have chosen to harbor unforgiveness in your heart. David said, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord won't hear me. Maybe your prayers are going unheard because you're choosing to walk in unforgiveness. In fact, Jesus said this. He said, if you don't forgive, he said, my Father in heaven won't forgive you. Now that ain't what I said. Like Pastor Rod said, that's what the scriptures say. If you don't forgive, then maybe you're holding on to the peace that someone else needs in their life. Maybe you're holding on to that. Listen, forgiveness helps remove negative things out of our heart to make room for positive. Hey, Miss J, negative things are being removed from our heart to make room for the fruit of the Spirit, right? Joy, peace, love. And it happens when we operate in all of the things that Paul said over there in Colossians 3:13. Look at what he said again. We're supposed to be operating in these 5 things. Come on, screen. We're supposed to be operating. It says, clothe yourself in these things. That's critical now. Clothe yourself, meaning put it on. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And some of us operate in those things at different levels, right? At different times. But Paul says he's not talking about putting it on as if it's 5 different things. He's saying put all of it on at one time and operate in those things. And once we begin to do that, then we begin to let go of bitterness because we're so focused on operating in compassion and kindness and patience, right? Listen to this. The fruit of the Spirit allows us to replace unforgiveness with God's fruit. And so anytime you remove something from your heart, watch this, you have to replace it with something else. And the reason we get in this cycle of resentment and vengeance is because we may have started the process, Takir, of forgiving, but then we removed that bitterness, but we didn't replace it with anything. We removed it, but we didn't replace it. And whatever you remove and you don't replace anything with leaves emptiness. And so this thing is twofold now. So once I remove bitterness and unforgiveness, then I have to replace it with something. And God tells us to replace it with compassion, with kindness, with patience. And so every time I forgive and I replace, then I consequently am becoming a better person, because it's not just the removing, it's also the replacing. Right? And so forgiveness reflects God's grace. I'm almost done. Forgiveness frees the heart. And here's the last point. Forgiveness is obedience, not emotion. See, this is the spiritual side of this, not the practical side. So if I call myself a follower of Christ and I choose to walk in unforgiveness, I'm also choosing to be disobedient. I got to drink some mushroom on that. That's a hard truth now. I'm choosing to walk in unforgiveness, then I'm also choosing to be disobedient. And Jesus says this in John 14, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, in other words, do what I tell you to do. Be obedient. That's the part we don't talk about. If I'm choosing to hold on to unforgiveness because forgiveness is about obedience, then I'm also choosing to be disobedient. Forgiveness is not about how you feel, it's about being obedient. Forgiveness is a decision to trust God with justice. It's a decision to trust God with vengeance. I'm not trying to get them back. I'm trusting that he's going to get them back. And he's going to get them back his way, whether or not I ever see it or not. Sometimes I used to think about when I would see leaders treat people all kind of way. And in the time, when I was younger and I saw leaders doing this, I didn't think anything of it. But then I start kind of watching how as they got older, they just kind of withered away. And I always thought that the way that you treat people in some way, shape, form, or fashion is going to come back to get you. And that's God showing justice and vengeance when you decide not to do it yourself. See, God has an interesting way of repaying people for what they did. And the great thing about forgiveness in Christ is that God repaid Christ for the stuff that we did. And so how dare we not forgive someone else when someone else already took our punishment? Listen, forgiveness does not always mean access and reconciliation. Now we know that God is a little bit different, right? So the scripture says God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. He wanted to bring us back into right relationship with him. For us as humans, sometimes right relationship is boundaries. And so we've got to recognize that when we forgive folk, we have to have enough I don't want to say intuition, discernment is the word. We have to have enough discernment to know when it's time to reconcile and when it's time not to reconcile. When do I trust again? And when do I put up boundaries and barriers and disrupt access? Right. And you've got to understand that all of this is reflective of God. So here in Colossians 3:13, we learn three things about forgiveness on the spiritual side. Number one, forgiveness reflects God's grace. Number two, forgiveness frees the heart. And whatever you remove from your heart, you have to replace it with something else, or your heart will be empty. And some of us are right there, Ms. Edmonds, Takir. Some of us are right there. We have walked in the forgiveness. We have removed the bitterness, but we didn't replace it. And so we don't feel any gratification from the forgiveness because we didn't replace it with anything. And whatever you remove, you have to replace or you feel empty. Right? And so when I remove that bitterness, I got to replace that with peace, with love, with joy. And how do I do it? How do I replace it with those things? I got to begin that work of getting in the word, of praying, of meditating, of talking to people who have been where I'm at in order to replace it. And the third thing was forgiveness is obedience, not emotion. Right. And so here's a critical story that I read this morning as we get out of here. It was a story that I read in the Bible in Matthew 18 that highlights this point. And the story was about a king and a servant. And the servant owed the king an insurmountable, unpayable amount of money. He couldn't pay it. He couldn't possibly pay it. And he cried out to the king and he begged him and he said, "Listen, king, I'll figure out how to pay it." He said, "I'll figure out how to pay what I owe you." And the king said, "You know what? I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna wipe your slate clean. You don't owe me anything. Go on about your business. We good." The servant left and he went on and found one of his homeboys who owed him an amount that could be paid, a lot smaller amount. And he told his boy, his servant, he said, "You're going to pay me this or I'm going to make sure you locked up." The king got word of that. And he said, "How dare I forgive you totally of something you could never pay, and you go and you not forgive someone else of something they could have paid?" And he calls him wicked. Here's a sobering fact. When we choose to be forgiven by God of something that we could never pay, but we go and we don't forgive our brother, Scripture calls us wicked. I didn't make it up. It's in the Bible. And so it's incredible. It's imperative upon us. It's critical. It's essential that if we're going to call ourselves people of God, we're going to call ourselves good people, and we're going to call ourselves saved people, that we've got to walk in forgiveness. And God has done an amazing thing in us. He's empowered us to forgive folk. And we forgive folk not because we feel like it, not because it's about our emotions, not because they deserve it. We forgive them because we had an unpayable bill that was wiped clean. We had an unpayable bill that was wiped clean. Yes, I remember when they forgave my wife's student loans. The shout that was on her that day. An unpayable bill was wiped clean, and you're choosing to hold on to something in your heart because someone didn't pay you something that could have been paid. Listen, when you choose to harbor unforgiveness against anybody, you're effectively saying what they did to you is worse than what you did to God. Their bill to you is more than the bill that God forgave you on, because you couldn't pay it. And he chose to forgive you in his love and in his mercy. And so he calls us, in order to bring people closer to him, he calls us to forgive other people just like we were forgiven. Listen, here's your homework. You snowed in. Who do you need to forgive? Listen, maybe it's somebody from your childhood. Maybe your mom, your dad said some things to you, did some things to you, and you've been holding on to that your whole life. Have you started that process? You need to figure out who you need to forgive. Maybe it's an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend. Maybe it's your children. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's somebody close to you at your job. Who do you need to forgive? Question number 2 for your homework: what is stopping you from forgiving? Identify that. What's stopping me from forgiving this person? What is stopping me from clearing the air, sitting them down, maybe, and starting the process of forgiving? Because after all, whatever they did to me pales in comparison to what I did to God. And so maybe I need to start this process of forgiving. Listen, once you do that, do I need to put up some barriers? Do I need to put up some boundaries? Do I need to excommunicate this person from me? Can I use discernment to realize or figure out how I need to move forward? But listen, no matter what it is that you need to forgive a person for, it's freeing to you. Remove that bitterness and replace that bitterness with peace in your heart so that you're not empty. Listen, Father, we choose to forgive. Heal our hearts and help us walk in your peace. In Jesus' name we pray. Until next time, Dr. Williams signing off. Y'all be good.